Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Talking Point. My name is Fahraaz Patel. We'd like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us here on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. For over 30 years, the story of the Umkhonto Sizwe Special Operation Unit had remained shrouded in secrecy. Its members were known only for their extraordinary courage and the impact of their missions. Formed under the direct command of the then ANC President Oliver Tambo and Joe Slovo, this elite unit carried out some of the most daring attacks against the apartheid regime in the 1980s, from the famous or infamous 1980 Sasol bombings to strike on the Witbank Security Police Forces in 1988. Now, a groundbreaking new book titled Attacking the Heart of Apartheid uncovers the untold history of special ops through the voices of those who lived in it. The author of the book is Yunus Carrim, who is a veteran South African politician and a long-serving member of the ANC. Of course, he had carried out various positions within the Parliament portfolio committees as chairpersons for various ones of that, and of course served as the Minister of Communications between 2013 to 2014. He is my guest today on Talking Point. Mr. Carrim, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and jazakallah so much for joining us.
Wa alaikum salam, and assalamu alaikum to your viewers, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. Mr. Carrim, this book, why was it so important to tell a story about probably a unit many South Africans don't know about? They know, of course, about Umkhonto Sizwe, but not the deep work that was being done in hitting infrastructure, which was key to the apartheid regime.
Well, for precisely the reason you suggested in your question, these people, excuse me, were unknown, not least to the broader South African public, but also within the ANC movement, especially amongst the younger people, but also the more veteran type activists weren't aware of special ops. And yet they carried out, as you said, the most daring operations, most of the most daring operations that the ANC's Umkhonto Sizwe carried out. Secondly, the book suggests that this democracy didn't fall from the skies. It emerged from the titanic struggles over decades of hundreds of thousands of people, many of whom gave their lives, as indeed members of Special Ops did. And that the young people in particular need to cherish and nurture this democracy and make it work. It's very frayed at the moment. It's very challenged. It's fragile. And too much was invested in getting us to where we did in 1994. And so it is crucial that all of us, in whatever role we play, need to rescue this democracy. The book also argues that while the ANC was the premier liberation movement and is primarily responsible for getting us to our democracy in 94, it was the masses, ordinary people, civil society, a plethora of wide range of organizations that brought apartheid to its knees. It was they who unbanned the ANC by their activities, even if the ANC inspired many of them. So for all these reasons, such a book, it seemed to me, is necessary. And may I suggest, given your introduction, that we shouldn't make this too much about the writer. The book is about the people who waged that struggle. I didn't make that history. I merely wrote about it. I played another role in the movement, but not in Umkhonto Sizwe and not in the ANC's underground. So it's about them. It's their book more than it's mine. It's their stories that are in that book. I merely put it together. And the book, as you rightly point out, refers to the stories of what we call the foot soldiers, ordinary people who took part in these major operations. It quotes the leaders like Rashid Abu Bakr Ismail, their longest-serving commander, and others like Mac Maraj and Ronnie Castrol and Spiru Nyanda. But mainly it's a book about Patrick Chamuso, Ernest Pule, Makwala Nyalunga, and Iqbal Muhammad Sheikh, who, by the way, is one of the most successful ANC guerrillas ever, having carried out 35 operations together with a guy called Muhammad Ismail and another unknown, elusive person called Farouk Farista. They carried out 35 operations between them initially, And then from 1988 onwards, Farooq Farista, especially from 1990, worked with Iqbal to transfer arms, actually.
Mr. Carrim, talk to us about the duties of these foot soldiers, as you termed it, because a lot of it had to deal with intelligence. So you're dealing with an apartheid government that had probably one of the top tier intelligence memorandum at the time. And here you've got, of course, Umkhonto Sizwe, or the special ops of Umkhonto Sizwe, with probably very limited resources at the time. How do you go ahead and infiltrate, certain infrastructure within the National Party or government at the time, knowing that you're up against quite a powerful government like them?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. It actually goes to the heart of what is a guerrilla struggle. You see, in a guerrilla struggle, the balance of forces is very uneven between the state and a conventional army versus a group of guerrillas who were ill-equipped compared to the apartheid state's army, who were inexperienced compared to the training that the conventional South African Defence Force gave its members, and who, had to find creative and ingenuitive ways of hitting the apartheid state. Now, if you look at that Cecil operation, it was stunning, actually. Yeah. The 1980 operation that took place on the 31st of May, Republic Day for the apartheid regime, and into the morning of 1st of June, 1980, I mean, just look at it. So at 11:40 p.m., huge explosions at Cecil 1. Some 5-10 minutes away, and Natref, a few kilometers away, is also exploding. Then not long after that, some 100 kilometers away, in Secunda, further explosions. 2 days later, the police defused limpet mine bombs at the fewer offices. They were building Cecil 2 and Cecil 3. And it made world's news. If you look at the Koeberg operation, 2 weeks before Koeberg in Cape Town became active, explosions, 4 limpet mine explosions. It stunned the regime. Both these operations and others, like the attack on the South African Defence Force with a Grad P rocket launcher, stunned the regime. They couldn't believe that these things happened. So how was it done? Firstly, the ANC was quite good in recruiting, mainly foreigners, actually, people from Europe and so on, who were based in Maputo trying to help the Mozambique regime to survive after they overthrew the Portuguese colonialists. So you had people like Guido van Eken and Nora Bogart. Who's even heard of them? Frankly, I hadn't heard of them either until I started this project. From Belgium, Helene Pastoors, who's famous because she got arrested. Klaas de Jonge from Holland, who, of course, some of you, the older generation, might remember. He got holed up in the Dutch embassy after having been arrested, and he managed to sort of lure the police to take him somewhere to show them where a company was going to be hit with a bomb. But actually, it was just opposite the Dutch embassy, and so he slid in there, handcuffed as he was, and so on. And then there's people like Maria Overeem. Who's heard of her? Or Nicholas Heath and Bonnie Muller, British people who came into our country to do reconnaissance, to look at what the options were to hit this crucial economic and military infrastructure. Special ops was set up for precisely that reason, Fahraaz. It was specifically set up not to carry out routine MK operations like putting a bomb on a sort of transformer or putting a bomb on a little police station somewhere. No. The aim was to actually hit high profile, high impact, high visibility, strategic economic and military targets. And these people were specifically trained for that purpose, as distinct from the ordinary MK units trainings. They were given extra resources. They were given full attention by Oliver Tambo, no less, the president of the ANC, and Joe Slovo, a senior ANC and Communist Party member. They were allowed, unlike the other MK units that were geographically bound, to a locality or an area or part of a province, they were allowed to operate anywhere in the country. And they were allowed to recruit the best of the best, if you like. But I should stress that you cannot separate special ops from MK as a whole. It's part of MK, and MK is, of course, part of ANC. And, of course, there were very many good people also, just as sophisticated in some senses as the MK special ops cadres, who in other MK units, like the G5, Transvaal Urban Machinery units, which were led by Sizwe and
Mr. Carrim, I have to stop you there because we have to go for an ad break. But we are going to continue this conversation, just discussing, of course, breaking down the new book by Yunus Carrim called Attacking the Heart of Apartheid. I'll have more for you on a talking point after this break. Welcome back to Talking Point. Mr. Carrim, again, shukran so much for staying with us. Mr. Carrim, I want to break down, of course, many of these members had families. And when you look, of course, of the modus operandi of the intelligence within the apartheid government, of course, targeting families was one way of trying to get to the foot soldiers or other members of Umkhonto or Sizwe to try and go ahead and stop the guerrillas or the resistance against government. How difficult was it to balance both the family life but also the struggle in fighting the apartheid government, both you and, of course, many of your fellow comrades?
Well, firstly, I think one shouldn't equate me with these people. Although I took part in the political struggle, from 1971 onwards, I had two what you might call minor detentions compared to the risk that these comrades faced. I was never actually at risk of my life. These people were every moment. And their families were constantly harassed. Like the police would kick down the doors of the guerrillas whom they had traced had left the country. And there are references to that. Bani Molekwane's brother, Pek, who speaks about how they constantly came to the house and said, "Where is he? Where is he?" and so on. All the other operatives have different experiences of similar harassment of their families. It was a way of trying to find out where exactly these guerrillas had gone, which part of Southern Africa or wherever else they were. It was also to intimidate these families in a way that they hoped would reach those guerrillas so they might decide, not that anybody did, to come back rather than have their families face persecution. And they themselves faced various forms of persecution. There was infiltration by the security police, there was poisoning of their food, there was fomenting of factions within the guerrilla armies in Angola and elsewhere. And so, they did all of that. But to come back to a very crucial point you raised, how did they actually penetrate Koeberg? How did they manage to get all the information on the SADF, Voortrekker main base, etc., and of course Cecil? They used mainly whites, some South Africans, but mainly foreigners who were progressive and were prepared to support the anti-apartheid cause. Most of them were based in Maputo, helping Mozambique. And they were sent into the country, mostly by Joe Slovo recruiting them and Rashid Ismail Abu Baker. And they would come in and do the reconnaissance. That means check the infrastructure, check the pylons, the power stations, the security arrangements, the number of people that came in and out, the cars that were number plates and so on. So they did all of that. And then they would take it to Maputo, to Slovo or Rashid, and then they would prepare a plan. And then they would send in the operatives, South African operatives, who were going to carry out the operation to do a further reconnaissance or check. And those operatives would come back with further information. And once they got all the information, they put together a plan based on that information. And that's how guerrilla armies operate. They don't take on the South African Defence Force in this case, or the army of any state, wherever it may be, directly and frontally, because that army is too strong for them and has got too much more armaments. So you have to operate by stealth and by surprise and hit and run, as it were. Often these guerrillas carried out an operation and disappeared from the country into Swaziland, Botswana, and further on Mozambique and wherever.
Yeah, there's an article that, of course, based on your book, Mr. Carrim, because psyching out the SANDF, and of course you speak to that because here we are. We've got these key infrastructure of government. You mentioned Koeberg and other infrastructures, especially Sasol, and there's a part here in this another article from the Mail and Guardian which mentions the Sasol attack and the meticulous planning that had to go to that. How deep a detail did it have to have in order for these missions and operations to carry out? And a second question to that, you mentioned, of course, many overseas comrades would have come and said, we're here to assist because we have a progressive thinking, and the only way to end apartheid is through methods like that. So talk to us about that, just the psyche in trying to say, we're going to take on the government, but we're going to have to use guerrilla tactics in that manner.
Yeah, you must realize that from 1976 onwards, the Stuart Uprising onwards, South Africa was in ferment, right? There were a plethora of organizations surfacing, civic movements, residents and ratepayers associations, trade unions, youth organizations, women's organizations, a whole lot of networks of civil society structures, which finally, sort of most of them, came under the umbrella of the United Democratic Front in 1983. So there were struggles of all over the country, mostly locally based. And so basically, it's really that inspired the ANC to say, look, we have to do more. In fact, the ANC was tailing the masses. Black consciousness was more prominent. And many of these struggles, whatever others have said, I may be right, they may be right, I don't know. I don't think those struggles were inspired by the ANC in 76 onwards. It's later, and particularly the formation of the UDF, which basically had the Freedom Charter as its flagship, that you began to see the ANC taking a more leadership role. But the ANC felt in the late 70s that they were tailing the masses and they had to provide leadership. And they went to Vietnam, led by Oliver Tambo and Joe Slovo, a delegation that included senior ANC members. I think Thabo Mbeki was among them. And they went to Vietnam, and the Vietnamese told them, look, your struggle in South Africa is not primarily a military struggle, unlike ours. You don't have the terrain for it. We have large rural areas, forests and the like, where we can create liberated zones. You're not like Zimbabwe. You're not like other countries in Africa. You're a basically urban population. Your proletariat, your working class is quite established. The political consciousness is mainly in the urban areas. And you have to wage a political struggle primarily. Your armed struggle must support the political struggle. It must take the form of armed propaganda. That means inspiring the masses to take active mass struggle, open mass struggle against the state. Armed propaganda was meant to complement trade unions on strike or communities that are protesting against high rates and high rents and water service and other charges. So you must understand that Umkhonto Sizwe Special Ops came out of this visit to Vietnam, learning the lessons from Vietnam, that our struggle in South Africa is primarily a struggle of masses openly protesting, as happened actually in the 80s. And that the ANC's armed struggle is merely one prong or arm or pillar, as the ANC calls it, of four pillars of struggle. The other three pillars being the mass struggle, which is preeminent, the political underground like Operation Vula, and obviously international sanctions. Now, a lot of people are dismissive of the armed struggle. And my view in this book is that the armed struggle was nowhere as effective as is romanticized by us in the ANC movement, by the MK people who are still around and so on. But it was not as ineffective and ineffectual as is made out in the public domain. It was somewhere in between. And if you locate the armed struggle with the other three pillars of struggle and see it as interdependent on and interrelated with these other forms, you will see the whole armed, mass, underground, and international struggles merge together in an episodic, chaotic, unorganized way in the late 80s and brought the state to its knees. And it's not as if the ANC was powerful enough to overthrow the state, but it's not as if the state was able to contain the ANC forever.
Yeah.
It was, if you like, the best description, I think, well, for me at least, that I've come across of the late 80s is what Herman Guillaume, the Afrikaner historian, said. He said instead of a balance of power at the time, the late 80s, you had a balance of weakness. Neither side had won and neither side had lost. You had an impasse. And at least Mandela and the ANC leadership, and de Klerk, let's be frank, and the leadership of the Rest Party, had the sense to say, this can continue and the country will get destroyed.
Yeah.
Let us negotiate. Both sides came to the table, and out of that came our 1994 dispensation, contrary to all expectations, not out of violence, but in a peaceful, negotiated process.
Mr.
And we must also acknowledge, by the way, I have to say this with due respect, we must also acknowledge Nkosi Buthelezi, Prince Buthelezi. We must also acknowledge Constant Viljoen. They came in at the last minute. Constant Viljoen could, have mobilized the Afrikaner right to fight back. Prince Buthelezi could have mobilized the Amabuto and so on in KwaZulu-Natal to fight back. But we came to that 1994 and all that promise, which is why when you look at the present for us, it is sad and bad at where this country is and where the movement that I come from is. And we have to rescue this democracy, each in our own way, each in different forms. But we cannot allow this democracy to crumble, really.
Yeah.
Too much was invested in it. And in this book, these people, they sacrificed not for where we are now. They sacrificed for what the promise was of 1994.
Mr. Carrim, I have to stop you there because we have to go for a break. And I am going to, of course, touch on the present in a short while. But I'm going to be looking at the roles that Mr. Carrim had served, obviously, post 1994 and how, of course, we've led up to this time where we are in the current frame of South Africa. My conversation with Yunus Carrim continues after the break. Welcome back to Talking Point. I'm still in conversation with Yunus Carrim, the author of the book Attacking the Heart of Apartheid. And of course, he served as the Minister of Communication between 2013 and 2014. But Yunus Carrim, of course, was a Member of Parliament from 1994. Mr. Carrim, I want to touch on this transition into democracy. How easy or how difficult was it to move from a liberation movement individual to that of holding such an important position in power? And of course, the prelude to that was the CODESA negotiations and so much that had happened prior to that important day in April 1994. And of course, the formation of the parliament and of course, the first government of national unity that was at that time.
Yeah, firstly, you can't separate the experience of any individual from the processes and events of the time. So firstly, I think it was remarkable that the ANC and the National Party got together to negotiate. Obviously, before 1990, as we all know now, negotiations had begun in a sort of like episodic way, where senior business people from South Africa began to troop off to Lusaka to meet Oliver Tambo and the ANC leadership. They were concerned about the economy. They were concerned about the increasing isolation. They were concerned about worker strikes endlessly, which reduced productivity and their profits. So they had their business stroke profit reasons for wanting some sort of signal from the ANC that they'd be prepared to negotiate with the National Party government. And they also reached out informally to senior National Party leaders. And then there were many other civil society structures and even some individuals within white society, as it were, who also reached out to the ANC in various ways in the capitals of Europe and whatever. So around 1988, if I remember correctly, onwards, some sort of secretive, quiet negotiations began. I mean, in Switzerland, I think it was, they had engagements and elsewhere. and there are books written about it. Perhaps one of the best is Alison Sparks' books. For book, what is it? Tomorrow is Another Country. And you know, so there was like, we were also picking up rumors inside the country that, you know, there were these informal talks taking place, but such talks could take forever. And then suddenly came 2 February 1990, and the ANC's unbanning. I think the ANC was taken aback at the sweep of the unbanning. The Communist Party was also unbanned, and the announcement of the release of Mandela and others. Of course, shortly before that, I think it was 1987, or was it? Yes, they released the first tranche of senior ANC leaders, Governor Mbeki, Harry Gwala, and others. So events were taking place. You must also remember that once the Soviet Union collapsed, the Eastern Bloc collapsed, if you like, the Berlin Wall collapsed, and the threat of communism receded, the West also began to put enormous pressure on the apartheid government, which they supported as a bolster against communism, to say, look, now you have to negotiate. The longer you take to negotiate, the more difficult the terms will be for you. So there's also pressure from the US, the UK, and others, not least Margaret Thatcher, I gather, on the P.W. Botha and later F.W. de Klerk to negotiate. And they also realized, de Klerk realized, look, he cannot continue like that. And it's better to negotiate in 1990 onwards than 10 years later or 5 years later, because the terms will be very different and more unfavorable to the white minority. So the transition, firstly, I think the ANC ran circles around the National Party government. They didn't have the capacity to negotiate. When you look at the quality of our negotiators compared to theirs, even somebody like Rolf Meyer will admit, the ANC really outmaneuvered the National Party government. So what we got then was the particular constitution, interim constitution initially, and then the final constitution in 1996. Now, the young people of today, particularly in the townships, are very critical. They feel it was a sellout. They feel it was too temperate, too moderate a negotiated deal. And they feel we didn't transform the economy. Now, to some extent, elements of what they say are true. But you see, you have to look at the balance of forces at that time. Internationally, as I said, the Soviet bloc that supported us had become very weak and had begun to crumble. The social democracies of the West, Sweden, Norway, Finland, etc., their social welfare regimes had begun to recede. And in Southern Africa, the leaders, Kaunda and others, were saying, look, negotiate, because there's no other way out. You're not going to win through a military.
Mr. Carrim, I want to come in there. So concessions had to be made. Is that what you're saying in that regard?
Yes. Yeah. You see, you had no choice because you were weak. You weren't able to implement a radical social democracy, right? You had to strike a deal. You needed the business sector's investment. You needed them not to flee because now there's a government that was influenced substantially, as they saw it, even the non-communists, by the Soviet ideology. And they were scared of the Freedom Charter and what it implied for business. And you needed them. We didn't have a strong enough black business sector to replace the white sector. We still don't, by the way, 30 years plus. So you had to negotiate and make concessions, a give and take thing. I think we did as well as we could in the circumstances. But since then, we could have done more to transform the economy. And that's not a failure of the 1994 process. That's the failure of us as the ANC, us MPs, including me, to effect more fundamental changes to ensure a more inclusive economy that ensure that Africans and so-called coloreds in particular, but also Indians, were and are included more in the economy. So that's a failure of the post-1994 movement, not that negotiated transition. That's how I feel. And basically, what I'm saying is, if you have people like Kaunda saying, you've got lots of your refugees, lots of your guerrillas in our countries, and we're being constantly attacked by the South African Defence Force, constantly attacked by the South African Air Force, we cannot continue either. We also need to negotiate with the apartheid regime around economy and trade and so on, and more openly do that. So there were a variety of factors that influenced what happened then, and I think people are unfair to say all of it was a sellout. We could have done better, but we didn't do badly, certainly, in my view.
Mr. Carrim, I want to go to as probably as early as 10, 12, or even 13 years ago. But before that, I want to go to Polokwane 2007, because that's when a lot of many analysts would say was probably the start of the downfall in terms of the ANC. And the reason why I'm asking is because from there onwards, we start to see maybe a bit of a slow decline of ANC support in local government elections and that of national elections. You, of course, served in various portfolio committees in your role as an ANC member, and of course, you had that one-year role where you replaced Dina Pule as the communications minister between 2013 and, of course, 2014 when the elections were held. Did you at that time see a bit of the slow decline of the ANC to where we are right now in last year's elections, where they dropped below the 50% mark?
Well, it wasn't obvious to me then. It might have been obvious to others, but not to me, certainly. The immediate outcome of Polokwane didn't necessarily mean that the ANC will inevitably decline. It's in the years that followed. For example, many of us, even those who are close to me, and I'm close to them, who were very close to Zuma at the time, had no idea about the pernicious influence of the Gupta family and the extent to which the president of the time, Zuma, would allow the country to be run by a group of rapacious, greedy, exploitative people from India who had no political history, no political pedigree, weren't even here. But you can't reduce the decline of the ANC simply to President Zuma. He certainly contributed to it, as did those who were around him at senior levels and who had his ear. I think you should also locate the 2008 financial and economic crisis that shattered many countries. We actually suffered. Jobs of about, I think, 1 million or more were lost, but nowhere near as badly as other countries. And the declining caliber of the civil service, the declining quality of us as public representatives, many of the struggle era activists had retired. And what was emerging was a new generation, slowly, not many, but emerging then, of young people who didn't have a struggle history necessarily, and had a different set of values from those who were from the struggle era. Not that some in the struggle era generation didn't turn to corruption either. In fact, that's pretty obvious, as we all know, they have. So I think it was obvious from about 3-4 years after Zuma became president that we were in trouble. The media played a magnificent role in exposing the corruption in the state-owned entities, the appointment of people linked to the then president who were not competent, certainly, to do the jobs that they were allocated in the state-owned entities and in other public entities. The first signs that the Gupta family, whom many of us had never heard of, were deciding things that have nothing to do with them, including being aware who might become the next minister of a particular portfolio, in this case, sport, as you know. Now, then the signs were clear. I was Minister of Communications for a very short time, I think it's 11 months.
Yes.
And my own experience, I could see also undue interference in decisions around digital migration, South Africa Connect, the broadband policy of the ANC and so on, but it's never overt. I have to be frank and honest. The president at that time never asked me to do anything wrong.
Mr. Carrim,
But
sorry, I have to stop you there because we are, of course, have to head into an ad break. But after the break, we're going to be discussing the current state of South Africa, where we are right now. So my conversation wraps up with Yunus Carrim after the break. Welcome back to Talking Point. Mr. Carrim, I just wanted to get your take on the current state of South Africa where we are at this moment. You've got this Matlanga Commission that is happening. You've got, of course, trust within elections, within politics, certainly at a bit of an all-time low at this moment. You speak to the citizens on the ground, their trust in politicians is not there at this moment. Where are we now in terms of the country from Yunus Carrim's perspective?
Well, we are where you say we are. We're in a very difficult, challenged situation. And unless we rescue it very soon, it'll be much, much harder to get back on an even keel. What's happening in South Africa also can't be separated from what's happening globally. The global situation is dire. Global economic rates are low. You've got meism all over the world. Politicians are not trusted. And make America great again, make Europe great again, no to immigration. You get the drift, right? And in conditions of economic difficulties, what you have, and increasing inequalities, people retreat into the ethnic enclaves, either tribal or racial or regional or religious. Things are not good. Look what's happening in the Middle East at the moment. Look at Palestine, Ukraine, and so on. We're in a very troubled situation. And to some extent, what's happening in South Africa is a reflection of that. And to some extent, it's a reflection of our own failures. Now, we cannot afford for things to go the way they are. We have to rescue this democracy. I've been arguing for 15 years or more that you cannot trust the state, the government, the political parties. Civil society has to be strong, united, well, relatively united despite their inevitable differences. And I think that civil society should work with the state when it does sensible, positive things, and it should tackle the state when it does stupid things. So, where it's delivering services, I think civil society organizations must work with it. And where it's not delivering services, civil society must challenge it, like the water outages and the electricity outages in the municipalities. And unless people take to the streets, unless people organize, unless people engage, this is the democracy, not of the ANC, not of the government, not of the parliament. They are merely custodians. And I was part of that, obviously, up till last May. We were just custodians. The democracy belongs to the people who made it happen. And it is the people that must, in their various ways, in their various doctors' organizations, lawyers' organizations, and religious organizations, and whatever form, they must rescue this democracy. There's no other way forward. You see, one of the things about writing this book was the effect, it had on me. It's just reinforced my view that you can never, never give up. Those people that died, who I referred to in this book, they gave their lives so that we could have 1994. We owe it to them, and we owe it to future generations. One of the reasons the book is written, hopefully in a modest, temperate way, I hope it'll remind people about what it took to get to 1994. You see, unless we get a better grasp of the past, we can't understand the present nor shape the future. And this book, I would ask people to consider buying. It's available at Take-A-Lot, at Loot. It can be delivered to people's addresses without any charges, to their physical addresses, and at exclusive bookshops and other stores. It ranges between 325 rands to 400 rands. Let me stress, I'm not selling the book to get anything personal. In fact, none of the proceeds that normally come to a writer, which is not much anyway, goes to me. It's all allocated to the families of those in MK Special Ops who died in the struggle. So I know some people have bought more than one book so that they could offer it as a donation to those families. And I don't think it's a big deal. They're not taking anything. You don't want to take any money out of a book on people who gave their lives for the democracy that you have benefited from. In any case, for 40 years, I worked in the public sector, 10 years in university, 30 years in parliament. I've got a handsome pension. I don't need that money. And of course, we've had 4 launches so far, and the final one is in Pietermaritzburg on the 18th of October at 2 o'clock at the Natal Witness Office in Hussein Abaji Street, and the book is available for sale there. But I should stress that all of us have a responsibility to make this democracy work. And the sooner we all get to finding a role for ourselves, it doesn't mean in politics for us. You can be a doctor that offers free services once a week or half a day a week. You can be a teacher that offers free services for mathematics and science to disadvantaged students. And we can all contribute in our own ways. This is our country. This is our democracy.
Mr. Carrim,
It's for us to make it work.
I want to come to, because you mentioned something important about the ANC is a custodian, and this goes for all political parties, because if the ANC, of course, has a bit of a blip, the DA will come in, or the EFF, or any other political party, and so on and so forth. The ANC would do the same to the DA. When do we come to a point where, you've mentioned civil society and the actual citizen at large says, no, it doesn't have to be the political parties making our decisions. We, the citizen, can do that. Of course, when you look at the constitutional makeup of the country, everything needs to go through a legislative process. But where do we draw the line in terms of saying, no, civil society, the citizens, many other aspects of society can say, we want to be the decision makers of this country?
Well, nowhere in the world does the citizen, the average citizen, make the policy decisions.
Yeah, of course.
Which are complex. But what the citizen has the right to do, and the power resides with the masses out there, the citizens, the voters. Excuse me. When it comes to voting, you can choose a party, or in the case of local government elections, a civil society structure that's progressive. My own view is, look, anybody who abides by the Freedom Charter and its values, and the Constitution and its values, is progressive. If you look at the Freedom Charter and what it seeks to implement, it will ensure a relatively equal society, a democratic society, and a whole lot of other attributes that this country desperately needs. Now, I come from the Communist Party. I serve on its Central Committee and Politburo, and we have taken a decision to stand on our own. So obviously, my commitment is to the Communist Party primarily. But I recognize that you need a broader movement also. And the ANC, for all its failings, still has a major social base, particularly in the African community. And what you are now in is firstly era of coalitions, okay? And in local government, you're going to see that even more starkly because many little organizations are going to surface in the localities. Individuals are going to surface. There are ward elections where an individual not connected to any party can win. So next year's local government elections, I think, will provide a deeper foundation for the future of coalition politics in this country. And that's not different from what's happening globally. Many parties, many countries, no party gets more than 50%. But secondly, when you talk of civil society, there's a national dialogue process underway. Now, obviously, the state has to be involved, the government has to be involved, the parliament has to be involved. But primarily, it is ordinary citizens that must shape the outcome of the national dialogue. And they can only do it if they're effective and if they're tactically astute and if they're there. So this national dialogue gives us an opportunity, like we may not have in the future for us, to make this country work. That's it.
So you're giving a thumbs up for this national dialogue, Mr. Carrim?
Yes, for all its contradictions and for all its difficulties, they're inevitable, many of them. I think it can work, provided the politicians find the right balance between their roles and, I should say, our roles. I'm still a politician outside Parliament, obviously, and actually civil society. And mind you, can I say something? Yeah. When I'm critical of where the ANC is now, I speak of myself too. I am complicit in this. I have been part of it since 1971, this struggle, right? And I'm still part of the ANC and the Communist Party, though my primary responsibility is to the latter. So I'm also responsible. I'm not sitting here in an armchair and criticizing. I'm criticizing myself as much as anybody else. We haven't done enough. We have been failing for the last 5 years and more. And we have to do our bit, however we do it, to rescue this democracy.
Mr. Carrim, one final question. South Africa, in a few weeks' time, is going to be hosting the G20 Leaders Summit. A lot of international analysts or those involved in the subcommittees have given a thumbs up in terms of the way South Africa's carried itself so far in the presidency. In 3 minutes, Mr. Carrim, how does South Africa fare in terms of the G20 Leaders Summit? How big is this for the country, given what the bloc represents?
Well, it implies and suggests very strongly how important this country is to this continent, the developing world, and globally, whatever our problems are. Secondly, that what makes the G20 work, we are merely the host, is the participants in the G20, particularly what the developed rich countries do. So if it has to work, all these countries, both from the developing and developed world, have to work together. Thirdly, it's yet another opportunity, because we're having it in a developing country this time, for us to raise issues about the trade imbalances between the developed and developing world, about the inequalities that persist, about the exploitation that continues of our resources, about the amount of money that's extracted from this continent, some 70 billion or more, in terms of illicit financial flows. And in fact, as you might know, many studies have shown, even by UN and other agencies, that more money is taken out of this country through the illicit financial flows than is actually brought in through development aid. And we also have to take into account that we need a multipolar world. The US and the West cannot continue to dominate. China is emerging, India is emerging, Russia is emerging. There are projections that China may be the biggest economy in this planet in years to come. Others question that. So we cannot continue with this unipolarity. We need a multipolar world which recognizes that we need to be more balanced in terms of power, and we have to be more cooperative. We've got climate change looming, if it's not already happening. We've got projections of possibly another virus of the sort we had from 2020 onwards, and we have to work together. So you've got a polarization taking place at one level globally, and
Mr.
another
Carrim?
will attempt to come together. And we are leading the latter. We want us to work together, and I wish the G20 well, as no doubt all of us will.
Mr. Carrim, unfortunately, again, time has come to the end. Absolute pleasure having you on. Shukran so much. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Thank you for having me.
The absolute pleasure. That's Yunus Carrim, former communications minister, but the author of the book, Attacking the Heart of Apartheid. It's an essential read, a book, and understanding, of course, just how the special forces within Umkhonto, where Sizwe had taken on the apartheid government. That's all I have for you in Talking Point from myself, Fahraaz Patel, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.